September 18, 1944, Lorraine, France. The mist clung low over the fields of Aircourt, rolling in quiet waves through the hedgerows and broken orchards. From a distance, the hulks of German Panther tanks looked like crouching beasts, still, confident, and patient. The crews had slept inside their machines, warm with the smell of fuel and gun oil. They knew what awaited them, the Americans, again. Outnumbered, outgunned, the enemy always came. And the result, they thought, was always the same. Oberleutnant Friedrich Vogelsang leaned out of his cupola, binoculars pressed to his eyes. His Panther, turret number 221, idled on a rise overlooking a broad patch of fog-drenched farmland. Behind him, 20 other Panthers stood ready, their engines rumbling softly in unison. Through the morning haze, he spotted movement, a line of Shermans crawling across the far edge of the field. Die Amerikaner, Vogelsang muttered, a half-smile tugging at his lips. So they've brought their tin coffins again. His loader laughed. They never learn. Across the field, Captain John Jack Harrison sat hunched over the radio inside his Sherman command tank, sweat beading under his helmet despite the chill. His voice was low but steady. Keep it tight. Use the tree line for cover. Don't let them see your holes. He knew what they were up against. The Panther outclassed the M4 Sherman in nearly every measurable way: thicker armor, a sharper gun, better optics. Harrison's only edge was speed, coordination, and the willingness to move first. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The German attack began at dawn. Vogelsang's formation rolled forward through the mist, guns scanning the tree line. Their commander's voice crackled through the net, "Fewer free." The first shot came from 1,800 meters. A Sherman on the American left flank erupted in flame, its turret flung aside like a toy. Vogelsang smirked. See? They never last long. But then, as his tank traversed its gun for a second target, a sharp clang echoed from his right, the metallic crack of impact. A 75mm shell had slammed into the side of another Panther, penetrating through the ammunition rack. The explosion that followed was instant, violent. A black column of smoke rose where the tank had stood. For the first time that morning, the laughter stopped. The Shermans had found their range. They weren't charging blindly across open fields as expected, they were waiting, firing from cover, using the fog to mask their movement. Harrison's gunners picked out silhouettes and fired in disciplined bursts, always in pairs, always aiming for the flanks. Within 20 minutes, Vogelsang's battalion had lost 4 Panthers, 3 of them to unseen enemies firing from 1,200 meters away. Over the radio, frantic calls echoed, flanking fire from the orchard. Can't see them, then static. Pull back behind the ridge. Vogelsang barked. We regroup and strike again. But pulling back was slow. The heavy Panthers bogged down in churned mud, their transmissions straining. A Sherman from the 37th Tank Battalion darted from behind a hedgerow, fired, and reversed before the Panthers could turn their turrets. The round struck the lead tank's sprocket, snapping it clean. By 08:30, the fog had lifted enough for the extent of the damage to show. 14 Panthers burned across the fields, another 6 sat abandoned. Harrison's force had lost 3 Shermans, 1 to a direct hit, 2 to mechanical breakdowns. Over the radio, an American voice chuckled. Not bad for tin coffins. That night, Vogelsang sat beside his immobilized tank, staring into the embers of a field fire. His confidence was gone. He had fought through France, seen Shermans burn by the dozens, but never like this. The reports came in steadily through the evening, Panthers destroyed, missing, or mired. Mechanics worked through the night, their faces drawn and silent. Somewhere in the distance, the engines of the surviving Shermans purred, repositioning for morning. And in the quiet between the dying fires, one of Vogelsang's crewmen whispered what none dared say aloud. They're learning how to hunt us. September 19, 1944, near Aircourt, France. The second day began not with gunfire, but with stillness. A cold mist hung low over the Lorraine countryside, dulling every sound except the distant cough of tank engines starting up. To the German 111th Panzer Brigade, it felt like yesterday had been a fluke, bad ground, bad luck, perhaps a few overeager gunners. Their commanders assured them the Americans had merely gotten lucky. Inside one of the Shermans of the U.S. 37th Tank Battalion, Lieutenant William Bill Reynolds didn't feel lucky. He felt exhausted. The crew hadn't slept more than 2 hours, and the smell of cordite still clung to their uniforms. They'd spent the night resupplying, wiping soot from their gun mantlets, and whispering about the day before, how 30 Shermans had faced down a force nearly 3 times their size and lived. "Don't get cocky," Harrison warned over the radio at dawn. "Yesterday they underestimated us. Today they won't." At that moment, 10 miles away, German armor was already moving. Colonel Meinrad von Lauchert's plan was simple: a frontal drive straight toward Aircourt, crushing the thin American line before reinforcements could arrive. 2 battalions of Panthers led the push, supported by a scattering of Panzer IVs and assault guns. Luftwaffe reconnaissance was grounded by fog, but the Germans believed surprise was on their side. The fog, though, had other plans. American tankers in the 37th and 8th Tank Battalions were used to it. Lorraine's mornings were always wet, unpredictable. Visibility dropped to 50 meters. Harrison's men listened more than they looked, relying on the faint tremor of engines through the soil. Multiple heavies, bearing northeast, came the report from a forward observer crouched behind a hedgerow. "Sounds like Panthers. Lots of them." Harrison's reply was immediate: "Let 'em come. Hold fire until you can smell the exhaust." The Panthers appeared like ghosts, black silhouettes emerging from the mist. Vogelsang's tank was among them, scarred, grimy, but still functional. He was wary now, eyes darting from side to side, searching for that telltale muzzle flash. The first shot came from a Sherman hidden in a drainage ditch. The 75mm round struck the lead Panther square in the side at less than 300 meters, igniting the fuel tanks. Vogelsang swung his turret toward the flash and fired. The shell missed, plowing into a barn instead. Seconds later, another American gun barked. A second Panther exploded, turret spinning into the air. The fog turned every engagement into chaos. Tanks fired on shapes, shadows, and sometimes on their own comrades. German coordination, usually their greatest strength, fell apart. The radios crackled with overlapping orders and panic. "Pull back. Advance. Where's the flank?" Harrison used it. His Shermans moved in pairs, leapfrogging from cover to cover. They fired, relocated, fired again. When the fog thinned briefly, it revealed a battlefield of burning Panthers, hulks scattered across the meadows, some with hatches flung open where crews had tried to escape. By noon, German losses had surpassed 20 tanks. Harrison's units had lost 5. The disparity seemed impossible, yet there it was, written in smoke and steel. An after-action report from 13 Corps that afternoon captured the astonishment: enemy armor engaged and destroyed at close range by outnumbered U.S. forces using superior maneuver and coordination. Fog conditions neutralized enemy optics advantage. For the Germans, disbelief turned to unease. Vogelsang sat in his Panther, engine off, listening to the reports of burning comrades. His gunner whispered, "How can they see us before we see them?" He didn't answer. As night fell again, the Americans withdrew a few hundred yards to rearm. Mechanics worked under the glow of hooded lamps. One tanker, leaning against his hull, said quietly, "We're ghosts to them. And ghosts don't die easy." By the end of the second day, the legend of Aircourt had begun, the battle where outnumbered Shermans had learned not to survive the Panthers, but to hunt them. September 20th, 1944, east of Lizy, Lorraine. The third morning brought no sunrise, only a gray curtain of rain that turned the fields to sludge. The Panthers advanced anyway, their treads carving deep scars through the soaked French soil. Inside each steel beast, the air was heavy with fuel fumes and frustration. They had been told that Aircourt was nearly encircled, that the Americans were in retreat. Yet every kilometer forward seemed to cost another tank. Colonel von Lochert, commanding the 111th Panzer Brigade, pored over his map in a command half-track. "We push through today," he declared. "Aircourt must fall before dusk." Around him, his officers nodded, though none looked convinced. Radio reports told a different story: Panthers vanishing into fog and fire, messages cut short by explosions, coordinates lost in confusion. The Americans were not where they were supposed to be. Captain Jack Harrison, now operating from a forward command post outside Leezy, had learned to think like a hunter. His 37 Shermans were scattered across a 3-mile arc, hidden behind hedgerows, inside shell-pocked villages, along drainage ditches. They had spent 2 nights studying German movement patterns, anticipating not where the enemy was, but where they would be. At 0800, the first Panthers appeared, moving along a farm road flanked by low ridges. The lead tank's commander, Hauptmann Otto Reiser, felt confident. "The fog favors us again," he said. His gunner peered through the periscope, and froze. A Sherman appeared from the mist on the right flank, gun already aimed. Before Reiser could shout, the American round struck home. His tank jolted violently, oil spraying inside the compartment. The loader screamed. Flames rose. From the ridge above, 2 Shermans fired in quick succession. Both found their marks. Within minutes, 4 Panthers burned. Harrison's voice crackled through the net: "Shift to phase 2. Cut them off from the rear." To the Germans, it felt like the earth itself had turned hostile. Every patch of hedgerow concealed a gun. Every flash of movement drew fire. Vogelsang's tank, one of the few remaining from his original company, managed to flank right, spotting what looked like a retreating Sherman. He fired twice, both shots missed, glancing off a slope of wet earth. When he repositioned, the supposed retreating Sherman reversed suddenly, revealing another 2 waiting behind it. 3 barrels turned in unison. Vogelsang's Panther never fired a third time. By noon, the sky cleared enough for American air support to arrive. P-47 Thunderbolts from the 405th Fighter Group swooped low over the battlefield, their 500-pound bombs walking through the German lines. One pilot reported over the radio, multiple Panthers burning near Leezy. "They're bunched like targets on a range." Von Lochert watched from his half-track as the airstrikes ripped through his armored spearhead. His aide counted 18 destroyed tanks before the radio fell silent. By late afternoon, the 111th Panzer Brigade ceased to exist as a cohesive force. Of the 80 Panthers that had begun the offensive, barely 20 were operational. Many crews abandoned their machines, sinking them in ditches or setting them alight to prevent capture. Harrison's Shermans advanced cautiously, engines growling through the mud. The battlefield reeked of burning fuel and scorched rubber. Tankers moved among wrecks, checking for survivors. In one Panther, they found a wounded gunner barely conscious. When offered water, he whispered in disbelief, "You were supposed to run." In the evening debrief, Harrison summarized the day with weary understatement: "They came expecting lions. We gave them ghosts." 13 Corps intelligence officers compiled the results: 37 U.S. tanks confirmed destroyed or disabled, 262 German armored vehicles destroyed, captured, or abandoned across 4 days. The figures seemed unreal until the photographs arrived: miles of blackened Panthers scattered across the French countryside. As dusk fell, the thunder of battle faded. In its place came the hiss of rain striking metal and the low murmur of victorious men too tired to celebrate. The laughter of Panther Crews had ended. In its echo, the myth of German invincibility began to die. September 21, 1944, Vic-sur-Seille, Lorraine. Morning came like a shroud, gray, silent, and thick with the scent of smoke. The fields east of Aircourt were a graveyard now, dotted with the carcasses of German armor still smoldering from the day before. What had begun as a confident thrust by the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades had devolved into chaos. The fog that once protected the Panthers now trapped them, turning every hedgerow and rise into a killing zone. For the Americans of the 37th Tank Battalion, the previous day's success did not breed arrogance. Captain Jack Harrison knew better than to trust statistics. Panthers could still kill at 1,000 yards, and the German habit of counterattacking at dawn had not vanished with the smoke. At 0630, reports came in from the 22nd Reconnaissance Squadron, enemy armor massing near Vic-sur-Seille, perhaps 30 vehicles, likely the remnants of the 113th Brigade regrouping for another push. The Germans had not learned humility, only desperation. Colonel Bruce Clark, commanding Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, studied the new map markers and exhaled through his teeth. "They're trying again," he said. "They still think they can break through to Aircourt." Harrison's Shermans were repositioned across the Seille Valley, engines rumbling under camouflage nets. The crews were exhausted, some having slept no more than an hour. Grease-stained hands loaded armor-piercing rounds, the dull brass catching the first hints of light through the fog. On the opposite side, Oberleutnant Erwin Pfau led what was left of his company, 7 Panthers. They moved cautiously, guns sweeping the horizon. Pfau had fought in Kursk, had seen Soviet T-34s burned by the hundreds. But this enemy, these Americans, fought differently. They used terrain like camouflage artists, appearing and vanishing before he could bring his gun to bear. By 0730, the Panthers reached the outskirts of Vic-sur-Seille. Pfau ordered a halt. The village was quiet, too quiet. His gunner scanned the church steeple. "Empty," he muttered. The next second, a Sherman round smashed through the side of a nearby Panther, igniting its ammunition rack. The explosion rocked the entire formation. From the western ridge, Harrison's platoons opened up. 5 Shermans fired in rotation, the first spotted, the second corrected, the third confirmed. Armor-piercing shells struck from 800 yards, knocking out 2 Panthers within seconds. The fog that once aided the Germans now betrayed them, amplifying every muzzle flash. Pfau barked orders, his voice rising over the radio chatter. "Smoke! Pull back! Return fire at the ridge!" One Panther pivoted and fired, its 75mm shell striking a Sherman squarely. The American tank erupted in orange flame, its commander scrambling out, face blackened with soot. The exchange lasted 11 minutes. When the smoke cleared, only 3 Panthers remained operational. Pfau's own tank took a hit through the lower glacis, the driver's compartment filled with smoke, forcing the crew to bail. Pfau crawled out, his ears ringing. As he stumbled into the ditch, he saw one of his tanks, still burning, turret blown off like a toy. By mid-morning, the counterattack collapsed. Air liaison officers called in P-47s to mop up retreating armor. Thunderbolts screamed overhead, dropping bombs with surgical precision. To the men below, it was an orchestra of destruction, the shriek of engines, the whistle of falling ordnance, the percussion of explosions rolling through the valley. When the firing finally ceased, Harrison stood atop a Sherman, binoculars pressed to his eyes. The valley floor shimmered with heat and smoke. "That's it," he said quietly. "They're done here." The after-action report was clinical, almost detached: 29 enemy tanks destroyed, 6 captured, U.S. losses, 4 tanks. But for those who fought in the mud of Lorraine, numbers meant little. The victory was not just mechanical, it was psychological. The Panther, symbol of German invincibility, had been outthought, outfought, and outlasted. And in the words of one unnamed gunner scribbled in his field diary that night, "They came as hunters. We made them the hunted." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. September 22, 1944, Aircourt Sector, Lorraine. By the 5th day, the battlefield resembled a hallucination, a landscape of blackened armor half submerged in fog. Wrecked Panthers lay like ancient beasts in the mud, their gun barrels jutting skyward. The air stank of cordite, oil, and decay. And yet, despite catastrophic losses, German command still believed victory was possible. Oberst von Lauchert, now coordinating remnants of 2 shattered panzer brigades, convened his officers inside a ruined farmhouse near Basange-la-Petite. Around a table littered with field maps and half-burned cigarettes, he pointed to a narrow sector near Lizy. "They have overextended," he insisted. "Their tank companies are scattered. If we concentrate here, we can drive a wedge and cut off their command vehicles. No one contradicted him, though several officers exchanged weary glances. They had begun the Air Corps offensive with 262 tanks and assault guns. Fewer than 70 were still operational. Fuel reserves were dwindling, ammunition half-spent, and radio coordination nearly non-existent. Still, orders were orders. Before dawn, the remnants of the 113th Panzer Brigade began to form up, Panthers, Panzer IVs, and a handful of self-propelled guns. Their crews moved like men resigned to fate, silent and methodical. Across the valley, the Americans were already watching. From his observation point near Hill 318, Captain Jack Harrison scanned the terrain through field glasses. The mist blurred everything into pale gray bands, but he knew the signs: the flicker of exhaust smoke, the faint shimmer of moving steel. "They're coming again," he said quietly to his radio operator. Colonel Bruce Clark's voice crackled back, "Same plan, Captain. Draw them in, then hit hard from the flanks. Air support's standing by." At 0700, the first Panthers emerged from the mist, a ghostly procession of shadows moving east to west. Harrison's tanks held fire. The Germans advanced to within 800 yards before the trap snapped shut. From the left ridge, a dozen Shermans opened up, their 75mm guns spitting flame. On the right, concealed in an orchard, another platoon joined in. The crossfire was merciless. Sergeant Earl Wozniak, commanding Lucky Lady, fired 3 rounds in quick succession. The first ricocheted off a Panther's glassy plate, the second tore through its side armor, and the third ignited its fuel cell. "That's for the one they got yesterday," he muttered. The German formation disintegrated under the assault. Tank after tank caught fire, their silhouettes fading into smoke. Von Lauchert's radio erupted with fragmented calls: "Engine hit. Out of shells. Air attack incoming." Moments later, the roar of engines filled the sky. P-47 Thunderbolts dove through the clouds, unleashing rockets and bombs. The ground shook with every detonation. American tankers ducked instinctively, even as the pilots above carved through the German columns with terrifying precision. When the air cleared, the valley was silent except for the crackle of burning wreckage. Of the 40 German tanks that had advanced, 31 were destroyed or disabled within 40 minutes. Harrison climbed out of his Sherman and walked to the nearest ridge. Through the haze, he could see a Panther still smoking, its crew sprawled beside it. He removed his helmet and exhaled. "They just keep coming," he said, half to himself. Behind him, his radio operator replied, "Yeah, but they don't get far anymore." By afternoon, 13 Corps headquarters transmitted confirmation: German offensive effectively broken, Aircourt sector secured. The official tally over 6 days: 37 U.S. tanks lost, 262 German tanks and assault guns destroyed or captured. Historians would later debate the numbers, the tactics, the luck, but for the men who fought there, the truth was simpler. The Panthers' reputation had shattered. In the evening, as the surviving crews refueled and cleaned their guns, the setting sun cut through the mist for the first time in a week. The light fell over the field of wrecks, turning the burnt metal to gold for a moment, a brief, terrible beauty. A war correspondent observing from the ridge wrote in his notebook. "They laughed when they saw the Shermans. They stopped laughing here." September 23, 1944, Hill 318, east of Aircourt. The morning after the final German assault, the valley lay quiet. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons across the fields where the 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades had ceased to exist. The fog that had cloaked every battle of the past week was gone, replaced by a sharp blue sky, clear, pitiless, and bright over the wreckage. Captain Jack Harrison stood beside his Sherman, helmet under one arm, eyes scanning the horizon. The smell of diesel and burnt steel lingered in the air. Men moved like ghosts among the twisted carcasses of Panthers and Shermans alike, silent except for the crunch of boots on broken glass. The fight for Aircourt was over, but its weight had yet to settle. For 6 days, his 37 tanks had fought against more than 250 German armored vehicles. By every rule of war, they should have been annihilated. Instead, the battlefield was littered with the wrecks of the enemy. Some were burned to hulks, others abandoned in ditches where their crews had fled. Colonel Bruce Clark arrived just after dawn, jeep bumping across the muddy road. He climbed the ridge and looked out over the valley, binoculars raised. "Good God," he murmured. "They threw everything they had and still couldn't move us." Harrison didn't reply. He was staring at one of his own, a Sherman smoldering beside a drainage ditch. The crew hadn't made it out. A white star, blackened by smoke, still showed faintly on its side. Clark noticed. "We'll see them remembered, Jack," he said quietly. "All of them." Farther down the line, mechanics were already at work pulling salvageable parts from disabled tanks. Radios were repaired, tracks replaced. The war did not pause to let men grieve. In the German sector, what remained of von Lauchert's force was retreating east toward Chateau Salins. Fuel was almost gone, crews siphoned what they could from wrecks, abandoning even more vehicles along the route. Reports from prisoners revealed that some Panther crews had destroyed their tanks intentionally rather than risk American capture. One captured lieutenant, interviewed by 13 Corps Intelligence, expressed disbelief at the defeat. "We were told the Shermans were inferior," he said through an interpreter. "We did not know they fought like this." By afternoon, the American lines had stabilized. Engineers marked wreck sites with white flags for later recovery. Graves registration units began their solemn work. A chaplain walked among the men, reading quietly from a small, weathered Bible. For the tankers who survived, the shock of survival began to give way to something else, exhaustion and a kind of stunned pride. Sergeant Earl Wozniak, who had fought in nearly every engagement of the Air Corps battles, rode home that night. "It wasn't our tanks that beat them. It was how we used them. We hid, we waited, we struck fast. They never figured it out." He was right. Post-battle analysis by 13 Corps confirmed what the Germans had failed to grasp: initiative and flexibility had won the day. The Americans had used speed, terrain, and coordination between armor, artillery, and air support, tools the Wehrmacht had once perfected but could no longer sustain. By the evening of September 23, the first reporters arrived, their typewriters clattering inside makeshift press tents. The headlines that followed would echo across the Allied world. 37 Shermans halt 262 German tanks at Aircourt. Fog and fire stopped the Panthers. The death of the German Blitz. The numbers became legend. But for those who had fought there, the truth was more complicated. The Shermans had not been invincible, they had been outgunned, often outmatched. What carried them through was not steel, but will. As night fell, Harrison sat on his tank and watched the horizon fade. Somewhere beyond the darkened ridge, the war rolled on, toward Metz, toward the Rhine, toward Germany itself. But for now, in the quiet fields of Lorraine, the laughter of the Panther Crews was gone forever. September 24, 1944, Vic-sur-Seille, Lorraine. Rain returned to Lorraine on the 7th morning, falling soft and steady over the fields where the last Panthers had burned out. The smoke had thinned, the guns had fallen silent, yet the land itself seemed unable to rest. Craters filled with brown water. Dead cattle lay beside shattered farm wagons. A child's toy cart, left in a ditch, had melted under the heat of a tank fire. For the men of the 37th Tank Battalion, there was no celebration, only the work that came after. They moved cautiously through the ruined countryside, inspecting hulks of German armor, photographing serial numbers, counting wrecks. The official order from 13 Corps was simple: document everything. Captain Jack Harrison led one of the inspection parties, his boots squelching in the mud. He paused beside a Panther lying on its side, tracks torn away, the turret blown clean off. Through the open hatch, he could see the remnants of a map still pinned to the wall, a German grid chart showing the route to Aircourt. The irony stung. They had gotten so close. Nearby, Sergeant Earl Wozniak was prying open another Panther's hatch with a crowbar. "Still warm," he muttered. Inside, the crew was gone, the seats blackened. They never knew what hit him. "None of us did," Harrison replied quietly. the division's intelligence team arrived by jeep an hour later. Lieutenant Andrew Hodge, a sharp-tongued officer from the ATIS liaison group, began interviewing prisoners and collecting German logs. His summary was blunt: "They thought we were weak, sir. Poor tanks, no coordination. They came here expecting to win in a day." He flipped through his notebook. Instead, they met 37 ghosts in the fog. The phrase stuck. Within days, radio operators across 13 corps began calling the 37th the Ghost Battalion. Across the lines, remnants of the German 111th and 113th Panzer Brigades staggered eastward in retreat. Of the hundreds who had rolled into Lorraine, barely a fraction remained. Oberst von Lauchert's report to headquarters was terse, written in pencil: offensive capability destroyed. Air superiority decisive. Enemy coordination excellent. Further attacks impossible. At a temporary command post near Chateau Salins, von Lauchert sat silently after dictating the message. The once proud brigade commander looked every bit a defeated man, uniform stained with mud, eyes hollow. His adjutant recalled later that von Lauchert spoke only one sentence that day: "We laughed at them. God forgive us." Back in the American lines, engineers and tank recovery units worked around the clock to clear roads and tow wrecks. Panthers were dragged into fields for study by ordnance officers. The first U.S. technical reports confirmed what crews already knew: the German tanks were powerful, but heavy, slow, and blind in close terrain. The Shermans' mobility and coordination had turned those advantages into traps. By the afternoon of the 24th, word of the victory reached the rear echelons. Photographers from Stars and Stripes arrived, snapping images of smoldering Panthers with grinning tank crews beside them. Harrison refused to pose. "This isn't a trophy," he said. "It's what's left of men." That night, under a canvas tent near Vic-sur-Seille, the battalion gathered for the first time in relative peace. Coffee boiled in tin cups. Some men wrote letters home, others simply stared at the flame of the stove. Wozniak raised his cup toward Harrison. "To the ghosts," he said. Harrison nodded but didn't smile. "To the ones who didn't make it back," he corrected. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady, cleansing, relentless. Somewhere in the darkness, an engine backfired, echoing like distant gunfire. The men froze for a heartbeat, then relaxed. For the first time in a week, no one reached for a weapon. In the official record, the Battle of Aircourt would later be described as one of the most decisive armored victories of the U.S. Army in Europe, a turning point in the Lorraine campaign. But for the men who lived through it, it was something quieter, grimmer, and more human. They had seen death in the fog and survived it. And as dawn neared once more, the ghosts of Lorraine finally began to fade. October 1944, Nancy, France. The thunder of battle had passed, but its echoes lingered across Lorraine. In the weeks following Aircourt, the 4th Armored Division pushed steadily east, clearing the last German strongpoints between Nancy and the Moselle. The tanks that had survived the storm rolled forward again, patched and repainted, their scars still visible beneath new coats of olive drab. Captain Jack Harrison's Sherman, Lucky 7, bore 6 white kill marks on its barrel, Panthers, all confirmed. But for every mark of triumph, there were empty seats inside the battalion. The names of the dead hung on a clipboard in the command tent, updated each morning, each new line written with the same careful, shaking hand. Harrison rarely looked at it anymore. War correspondents descended upon the sector, eager to chronicle the improbable victory. They took notes, snapped photographs, and interviewed tankers between maintenance shifts. Headlines soon spread across the Atlantic: Sherman's triumph against odds, the miracle at Aircourt. In Washington, the story was heralded as proof of American ingenuity and resolve. But among the men who had fought there, no one spoke of miracles. Sergeant Earl Wozniak summed it up best during a debrief with a reporter from Stars and Stripes. "We didn't win because of magic," he said, lighting a cigarette with dirty fingers. "We won because we learned faster. They came in proud, we came in pissed. That's the difference." Post-battle analysis supported his blunt truth. Intelligence reports showed the Germans had misread the terrain, underestimated Allied coordination, and thrown their elite Panther brigades into a fog-shrouded maze. Their tactical radio nets were chaotic, their fuel convoys shattered by air attacks. Even their vaunted 75mm high-velocity guns proved useless when caught in ambush. By contrast, the Americans had fought as an ecosystem, tanks, infantry, artillery, and aircraft woven into a single rhythm. It was not the strength of one arm but the harmony of many. On October 4th, General Patton himself arrived to inspect the battlefield. His jeep climbed the ridges east of Aircourt, halting at the crest overlooking the fields where the Panthers had died. Standing beside Harrison, Patton removed his gloves and gestured with his riding crop. "Son," he said, "what you did here will be studied long after we're gone." Harrison didn't respond right away. He stared at the valley, now green again, grass already creeping over blackened craters. "Sir," he said finally, "I just want to make sure it was worth it." Patton's answer came without hesitation. "Every damn inch." Back in Germany, the loss at Aircourt triggered panic within the Wehrmacht's armored command. Reports flooded Berlin describing catastrophic material losses and complete breakdown of tactical cohesion. Hitler, enraged, blamed the weather, the Luftwaffe, and even the Panthers manufacturers, anyone but his own orders. In Allied briefings, the numbers became symbols of changing tides: 37 American tanks lost, 262 German armored vehicles destroyed. Analysts at SHAF headquarters later confirmed those figures as operationally verified. The myth of German invincibility, the dark shadow that had haunted Allied armor since 1940, was broken on the fields of Lorraine. Yet among the veterans, pride was always tempered by ghosts. In late October, the 37th Tank Battalion bivouacked outside Nancy. The men cleaned their guns, received replacements, and buried their dead. Harrison stood by a fresh line of wooden crosses, hands clasped behind his back. Rain pattered softly on his jacket. Each grave bore a small metal tag, a name, a unit, and the date, September 1944. He thought of the first morning near Leezy, the fog, the laughter over the radios, the sudden roar of engines. Those sounds were gone now, replaced by silence and wind. Before leaving, he placed his helmet atop one cross and whispered, "You held the line." As the column of Shermans rumbled eastward toward Metz, the fields of Aircourt faded into mist behind them. For historians, the battle would become a study in tactical brilliance. For the men who lived it, it would forever be something else, a test of nerve, of faith, and of endurance against the impossible. And when veterans gathered decades later, in tents, in halls, at reunions under American flags, one phrase would return again and again, spoken softly but with pride. "They laughed at our Shermans. They never laughed again."